morning. Oh, that's hideous. Never mind. I'm hiding at the far end of my garden again to escape everyone else. Can I teach in sunglasses? I can see a bit better. Okay, so no, that's horrid for you, isn't it? So today we are going to be doing a bit of theory, and I think this is going not just to my 3 groups, but all 6 groups, 7 groups. So hello everyone, if I haven't taught you. And we're going to be looking today at whether research in sociology can and indeed should be value-free and objective. So let's just think about what that means for a moment. So value-free means that you're not putting in your own opinions, your own biases. And objective suggests the same, really, that you're talking in facts rather than opinions. So a subjective view or a subjective opinion of the greenery behind me is it needs trimming, it's a bit of a mess. An objective view is there is greenery, it's 3 different plants behind me. Okay, so can and should sociological research be value-free and objective? I mean, essentially, it comes down to a debate between interpretivists and positivists, which I'm sure you've all talked about. Interpretivists are largely interactionist theorists. I'm just going to try and adjust this a little bit, that's it. Who believe that research absolutely cannot be value-free, that you're lying if you pretend it can be, that values are inevitably going to come into some bits of the research process, but should be firmly kept out of others, which we'll discuss later. Positivists, who are largely the structural theorists, such as Marxists and functionalists, believe that sociology should be taught or should be studied like a natural science in the same way, absolutely should be factual and value-free. So if I was to do an intro to the essay, assess the view that values can and should be kept out of sociological research, that's probably the kind of thing I'd be writing in it, that it's largely a debate between interpretivists and positivists. Now, I'm conscious that you may not have my essay plan in front of you, and fear not if you haven't, I'll just split it into 4 views. But I'm going to teach this lesson with a really bloody loud plane going over. Wait for the kids to join in, the dog's at my feet, the cat will probably be here in a minute. I'm going to teach this lesson as if we're answering the question, assess the view that values can and should be kept out of sociological research. And the reason I'm going to teach it like that is that's essentially the only thing they can ask you for 20 marks on paper 3, is that question. Should it be value-free? Can it be value-free? Should it be objective? Can it be objective? Okay. Now I'm going to split this into 4 different views, and I'd see that as 4 different paragraphs in the essay. You've done a little intro, that's the 5th paragraph. The conclusion will be the 6th, but there's 4 chunky paragraphs in the middle. Okay. It's not a huge essay in that it's only a 20 marker. It used to be a 33 marker. Now you've only got half an hour to write it, so we're not going to be writing pages and pages. Probably 3 pages would suffice. Okay. So let me do value 1, and I should say that if you're going to take notes from the textbook that I know you can all access free at the moment, the information's the same, but I'm doing it in what I think is more logical essay order, so don't get confused if it looks slightly different. Right. If you can't see the sheet, which I'm hopefully by the time you see this has reached you by email, can you write the title now? I'll say it again. On a blank bit of paper, assess the view that values can and should be kept out of sociological research. Okay, so there's your title. Then I would put space for a quick intro, and in that, as I said, I would essentially be arguing that it's a debate between interpretivists and positivists, so I'd put that in the intro. Then I'd go on to the first of our 4 viewpoints. So if you can't see the sheet, I'd put the title View 1 for this. I mean, obviously in the essay, don't put the title, but for the plan, View 1, research should inform our values. Research should inform our values. Now, what that suggests is that we shouldn't have any values or any ideas or opinions until we've looked at the objective research, and then we should form a value based on the research. Okay. Now, this view is very much used by early positivists, classical sociologists who were writing, I'm sure you'll have covered this, at the time of the Enlightenment project. So we're looking in Enlightenment theories here. So who were writing it around the same time as the Industrial Revolution, they were really arguing that we didn't need to rely on religion for all of our answers to every question, that actually systematic research into either natural sciences or into the social sciences could answer a lot of society's problems. Okay, so we're talking about the classical sociologists here, writing about the time of the Industrial Revolution and their Enlightenment theorists. So, classical sociologists argue, as I've just said really, that sociology should discover objectively which values were best, and therefore how society should be organised based on those values. So before saying the nuclear family is best, they should do some research into which family structure seems to be the most effective and which children thrive in the most. You can't just form an opinion, you have to do the research first. Okay, so Enlightenment theorists. They want to discover the truth then about how society works and then use this information to improve society. Now, Durkheim is a really good example of this. He was very much active at around this time. And he did a very, very famous study that you will look at later, I'm sure, into suicide. And he looked at international suicide statistics, official statistics, and tried to then spot trends and patterns using these official statistics that were happening in those societies. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail now because I will later, but he tried to look at societal facts, actual things that were happening in society, to answer why there were different trends and patterns for suicide rates in different countries. Now, if we were to evaluate that, we could do it very much in the same way as we could evaluate international corona death statistics at the moment, or COVID-19 deaths. Countries gather their statistics in different ways and they're not always highly reliable. So we can criticise that. But certainly Durkheim was part of this Enlightenment movement that wanted to look at big official statistics, use positivist research methods to spot facts within society that could then tell us how to improve it. So his idea was, if we could see what was wrong with how these societies were functioning, we could reduce suicide statistics. And as I say, you will look into that later. Feel free to look it up now. It's in all your textbooks. It's very interesting. Huge faults and holes in the whole of it, but it's a really interesting study. Okay. Karl Marx had very different ideas about how society should be researched and certainly about how that information should be used. So, for example, functionalist theorists presumably would feel very confident in giving their research to an elected government because they would see that government as reflecting the wishes of most of the country in a democracy, because we voted in that country. So they'd feel confident that government would reflect the interests of most of us. Karl Marx clearly is not going to see that as true. He would see a capitalist government as very much oppressing the majority's needs, the proletariat's needs, in order to benefit the bourgeoisie. He also differed on how research should be carried out. He used something called historical materialism, which again you may have looked at. He looked back at history, how the economy changed from really some sort of primitive communism within cavemen, that you are working for a small group and using each other to benefit everyone's interests, right through to capitalist societies today, which he thinks will one day end in more happily functioning communist societies that benefit everyone. So, although functionists and Marxists do their research very differently and how they think the research should be used is very different, they both believe that you need to use large-scale positivist research in order to look factually at how society should be improved. Okay. Now, we could evaluate both of them and say, are they actually value-free, these classical sociologists? We could argue that, in fact, they are far from value-free because they all share the value that they want to use their research to improve society. And that in itself is not value-free. And therefore, we could use that to criticise this viewpoint. The second view that you might want to start a new paragraph on is that values must be kept out of research. Now, this is a view carried out by modern positivists. So they are even criticising the classical sociologists who use positivist techniques. This is a more contemporary band of people. So unlike Marx and Durkheim, who were clear about wanting to improve society, modern positivists say you should go into research with absolutely no values at all. You should be completely neutral, completely objective and value-free. Very difficult. In order to do that, they suggest that really these researchers have to be almost robotic in their approach. And I'm thinking about how that might be possible. And really the only way I can think that you could be completely neutral about your research is if you are literally a research body carrying out research for other groups, such as the government or companies. So you have no pre-interest, pre-bias about this research topic. But even then, is it absolutely value-free? I'd argue that the minute you get involved in a piece of research, it's almost impossible not to form some values on it that might bias your research. I'd also argue that if you're being paid to do this research, actually meeting the interests of the person paying you, the paymaster, is probably overwhelmingly tempting to take into account, because you might want them to actually use you to do research again. So 2 reasons that's really hard to be completely value-free, even though this group would like to be. So just to recap, modern positivists say you have no part really in forming the hypothesis, the research question, the research statement. You are just carrying out this research. And I'm arguing even then, it's almost impossible to be value-free. Gouldner, who is from a group called Committed Sociologists, who's certainly a Marxist too, says that these researchers, if they think they're being totally value-free, are just spiritless technicians. Now that means they have no opinions, they are just literally carrying out the research, but they're not questioning the paymasters. And they would argue that's a bad thing. So they would say, for example, if you've been asked to commission a piece of research into the potential problems with lone parenting by this government, you should in fact be questioning why that research is being carried out. Was there a bias in picking to do that research? And who is it going to benefit at the other end? Okay, that's view 2. So these aren't going to look like huge paragraphs, by the way, so don't freak if they don't. View 3 is that values and facts, or that values, I'm sorry, let me re-say that statement completely, that values are inevitably going to be involved in some parts of the research process, and that in fact that can be really beneficial. Now the key guy behind this thinking is one of our initial interpretivist researchers and one of the founding fathers of symbolic interactionism, and that is Weber. Now, Weber argues that you are not going to be able to keep research out of every stage of the research process. There is only one bit of the research process that you have to keep research out of, that we'll discuss in a minute, and that is when you are collecting the data. So hold that thought. You might want to write down, I'll go through them with you now, the different stages that a researcher would really encounter when doing their own research, and think about whether research could be kept out of those or not. So the first stage of research is forming your hypothesis, picking your topic, forming your hypothesis. What are you going to test? What are you going to research? Now, what Weber would argue is, what Weber would argue is that it's impossible not to have values at that point of the research. So everything's blowing around again now. So when you are thinking about something to research, either your own personal values, so let's say someone who had grown up in an alcohol dependent family where there were real problems with that, that might be someone's real interest to understand how future generations are affected by that and what can be done to help. So personal values might affect your choice. Also, of course, your theoretical values or position is almost bound to. If you're a feminist, it's very likely you're going to be picking something to research that looks at the impact of patriarchy or disadvantages that women may have in society. If you're a Marxist, it's most likely you're going to be looking at how the bourgeoisie oppress the proletariat in some way globally, and what could be done to improve this situation or even overthrow capitalism, etc., etc. A functionalist might be looking at issues surrounding meritocracy or how society can remain stable. Okay. So, according to Weber, to recap, choosing your hypothesis, your topic, it's impossible not to bring about your values. And so Weber suggests that what sociologists need to do when they write a rationale of why they pick that is really state, I am a feminist, I am a Marxist, whatever it is, say that the person reading it is aware that there may be some bias inbuilt, even if it's inadvertently, into this research. The second bit, I guess, of your research is going to be picking your research methods. Now, again, I think it would be really hard not to be influenced by your theoretical values at this point. If you are a structural theorist, you're probably going to be picking positivist techniques such as official statistics, surveys, etc. If you are an interpretivist or an interactionist theorist, you're probably going to be picking micro techniques such as observation, unstructured interviews, etc. The third part of the research is going to be carrying out your or collecting your data. Now, even Weber and an interpretivist would accept here that you have got to be neutral and value-free at this point. If you are watching a group of people interact and you're observing them, if you're only writing down in your field notes the bit that backs up your theory or your hypothesis, that's pointless. If your interviews are so loaded with nods, shaking heads, leading questions, loaded questions, again, the research is going to be entirely pointless because you will only have collected your opinion, no one else's viewpoint. Okay. The next bit of the research that Weber talks about is interpreting your data. And again, I think the researcher would have to be really honest that actually whatever data they're interpreting, you are going to have some bias. Even statistics can be manipulated. Look at the way that the government are talking about death rates. You know, when we were still having 200-300 people dying a day, they were selling that as positive, even though it's way higher than other countries in Europe because it had come down from the peak of 2000. You can interpret and bias even your interpretation of statistics. Of course, you're going to be very tempted with either field notes from observation or notes from your, let's say, unstructured interview to cherry pick the bits that suit your interpretation, and therefore you've got to be really honest about that when writing up the research. The last thing that Weber feels strongly about is taking moral and value, if you like, responsibility for how your research is used. So, for example, let's go back to the idea that the government had commissioned a piece of work on lone parenting in this country. And the impact of that on children's life chances. Now, we know that the Conservative government, certainly if it's a new right Conservative government or is influenced by someone like Ian Duncan Smith, who was Minister for Wealth and Pensions under David Cameron, he was heavily influenced by new right values, by functionalist values, and he was desperate to encourage people to live in the nuclear family and to kind of condemn lone parent families. Now, if I was asked to do a piece of research into lone parenting and the impact of it by someone like that, Weber and me would suggest that you should be really asking why. Why are we doing this research? How are we ensuring it's not biased? And who is this going to benefit? I hope this isn't being set up just to condemn lone parenting. Okay, that's view 3. We are going to do more on this, obviously, when I come back, but that's actually plenty for the first 3 paragraphs. View 4, really simple. View 4, and you might want to kind of put a subtitle of this if you're taking notes, is that values will be and indeed should be involved in sociological research, both with picking how the research is used, as we've just discussed. And this is from a group of sociologists called committed sociologists. Gouldner, Gouldner, and Madral, Mydral, claim that sociologists should actively take sides. That's part of our role. They see that it's impossible not to, and that actually we should actively be questioning the paymaster. I've just talked about this, but really questioning why this research is being picked over another piece of research, and what we can do with it at the end. Who's it going to benefit? who's it going to help? So actively question the paymaster. We should show our values right at the very start. And Becker also highlights that actually it's the role of sociologists to defend the underdog, the mentally ill, ethnic minorities in this country, which has obviously been highlighted really graphically recently, the poor, immigrant groups, and that we should actively be looking at the plight of these groups and saying what can be done to help them, and really kind of forcing this on government, saying you've got to look at this research and think about how to equal up society, give everyone fair life chances. So that's committed sociologists. You could also do another little paragraph on postmodernity. It might be easier to explain this face to face, but for them, there are, in a sense, all our values are just formed by our life experience, and therefore all of our research is just a subjective reality. My view of growing up with two parents is different to yours. My experience of divorced parents is different to yours, perhaps, and that all we can ever give is our own value-laden perspective on the world, which makes it all a bit pointless. Again, we'll talk more about that when I come back. If it ever happens, I'm sure it will. And then you just want to do a conclusion. Now, remember, for a conclusion in sociology, it's going to be brief because there's only a 20 marker. You'd really want to say, overall, the most convincing argument is either that it should or shouldn't be value-free and objective, and give 2 ranked reasons as to why, and then you're done. So that's quite a quick traipse through that essay, but honestly, that's enough detail. Now, you can look at the notes in the textbook that you've got free access to online. I'm hoping some of you have bought the A2 version of H&H that we've been looking at. I haven't got a copy here, so I can't tell you the page numbers. I'm desperately trying to source one. But don't worry about that for now. There's how to do that essay, and I will come back to you soon with the exciting discussion, can sociology really be a science? All right, enjoy the sun today, folks. See you soon. Bye-bye.